I love seeing small businesses succeed, and I believe that success is a journey, not a destination. Think of this podcast as your weekly dose of inspiration, empowerment, and actionable insights. We're all about turning your one-day dream into a right-now dream. If you're ready to create the life you have always wanted, you're in the right place. Let's discover your unique talents and forge your path to success. It's not just about chasing goals, it's about embracing the journey and building a life that you love. Each week, I'll bring you conversations with experts on marketing, business, and a plethora of other topics that align with who you want to become. Whether you're an entrepreneur, creative, or simply someone on a mission, my goal is to provide you with the tools, stories, and a mindset shift to help you thrive. Buckle up, get ready to dig deep. Let's turn those dreams into gold. This is the Aurum Collective Podcast. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I am so glad you all are here. I cannot wait to introduce you to my guest today. She is someone that has truly transformed the way I do business and the way that I run the legal side of all three of my businesses. Paige is the founder and lead attorney at Paige Hulse Law Firm, as well as the attorney and mind behind the Creative Law Shop, a creative entrepreneur's online destination for attorney-drafted, industry-reviewed legal contracts and templates. Her resources are the best I have found, and they have given myself and my team so much confidence as we present them to our clients. Paige, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. That was such a kind introduction. I'm really excited to be here today.
Well, we're excited to talk to you, and I know that this is a topic that can feel super overwhelming to most people in the creative and wedding industry, so I know you're going to have so much insight. So would you first just tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and what you do?
Absolutely. So like you said, I'm an attorney. I have practiced in my own law firm for 7 years now. I'm about to hit the exact 7-year mark, actually, which is kind of wild. I've been a practicing attorney for about 10 years. I started as believe it or not, I started as an oil and gas litigator. I reference that specifically, as random as it sounds, because oil and gas litigation is known, especially if you practice within the legal industry, it's known for how incredibly complex it's a very contract-based business. And it's known for being really testing your mettle when it comes to learning how to write, draft, negotiate, and litigate contracts. So I started out doing that at full-time litigator. And as you can imagine, being a full-time litigator was very, very stressful. And I needed a creative, it was. And I was, at the time, I was also one of 3 women in the state practicing that full-time. So literally all day, every day, I was negotiating a room full of suits. So again, just I needed something to counterbalance that whole world. And I randomly, I don't know if I've ever even told you this, Becky, but I randomly picked up calligraphy as just a side. I would come home in the evening. It was like a way to unwind, just a side creative hobby that,
I love that.
Helped balance out the stress of arguing with people and drafting documents all day. One thing led to another, and as I think happens with so many creative entrepreneurs, and that calligraphy, I'm always hesitant when I say side business because it was more humble than a business. But that calligraphy side hustle became an accidental business because it was also that life phase where all of my friends were getting married. So I started this entire journey in the creative law realm because I accidentally found myself as a creative entrepreneur Googling, like, what do you do to start a creative business? And, obviously walking through the legality, et cetera. One thing led to another. And I realized I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. Literally every single member of my family is an entrepreneur. And I was just drawn to that lifestyle, and not only that lifestyle, but those are the types of clients that I truly feel like I was put on this earth to be an advocate for. And that's also the type of business I wanted to run as well. So I left my promising career as a litigator and started my law firm working with creative entrepreneurs. And just about every lawyer I knew thought I was crazy for the first few years.
I'm sure.
And here we are. It worked out.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense of how you've geared your templates and your resources, because you have that background of also being a creative entrepreneur, not just the legal side. So that makes so much sense as to why they make sense to us as the creatives on this side. So I love that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you can learn everything a textbook can tell you. You can learn everything a mentor can tell you. But until you actually walk through something and experience some of those incidents firsthand, it's hard to
Yes.
premeditate them in a contract and therefore, have a document that actually protects you to the best of your ability. So
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
good way to like literally meet people where they're at.
Yeah, for sure. I love too the background of leaving something that kind of everyone feels like you're doing something crazy. So that's how
Yeah,
most entrepreneurs feel of like, you're gonna leave this really stable thing for that. You're crazy. So it's fun that you have that background too, because you can really relate to the
oh
people who
my
are using
gosh.
your templates, which is amazing.
That's a whole, yeah, that I'm not going to waste our time on that. That's a whole other podcast episode, but emphatic yes to
Yes.
that.
I
It's,
feel like I say that on
I,
every episode. An
yeah,
episode for another day.
yeah, exactly. That's why I am truly so passionate about working with the people that I work with, because when I say I know what it feels like, I mean that I remember
Yeah.
that first day working from my at home law firm office. And I just remember
Mhm.
how quiet it was. Like, I'll never forget
Yeah.
that. It's like, okay, what
Yes.
now?
Yeah, I love that. I love it. Well, amazing. Well, would you tell us what you think is the number one thing that business owners need to do first when they're starting their new business?
Yes, and this is before I actually get started, let me remember to be legal myself. So everything I'm going to talk about today is for general educational purposes. I'm ethically required to provide that disclaimer.
Yeah.
So of course, for anybody listening to this, I hope that this is as helpful as possible, but please confer with an attorney in your jurisdiction if you have specific questions about that or about anything that I say. The number one thing, I think I'm going to go rogue with my answer here. The number
Okay.
one thing I would tell a new business owner to do, the obvious answer is make sure you're doing it legally, doing it right.
Mhm.
My real honest answer to that is make sure that you have that team of professional, and I don't mean people that are on retainer, but
Mhm.
establish that professional relationship with the licensed professionals that you will rely upon in
Yeah.
those crunch time moments or moments of dire need in your business later on. That's one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is they try to do the right thing. They find the resources that are as sound as possible. And I'll get into all that later on. But when push comes to shove and when they have a client that's pushing back and they're negotiating a really difficult termination scenario or something like
Mhm.
that, they don't have anybody to turn to as an advocate. And not only that, but attorneys, accountants, those types of individuals, you want to talk about tapping into a network. I see
Mhm.
the back end of literally thousands of creative businesses. So it's one of those, I enjoy when clients utilize some of those contacts I've made over the years. So that would be the first thing I would tell any brand new business owner. Establish those relationships so that you
Mm.
can fall back on them when needed and
Yeah.
you can be steered in the right direction to take the best next first step.
It's so good because it's really easy to think that, well, my business isn't going to have that problem or that won't happen to me. And I know we've
Mm-hmm.
had situations, I mean, we ran our wedding venue through COVID, and so we had many
Oh gosh.
situations where we were like, oh gosh, we're having to negotiate all these things with couples, and it was so nice to have an attorney in our back pocket who already knew our contract that we got from you, Paige, and who had looked it
Mm-hmm.
over, had made the appropriate changes for our jurisdiction and knew what we were offering and was able to say, no, you can stand firm on this. And here's what's happening right now in the law. And we were able to be confident going into conversations with couples, which I feel like a lot of creatives don't because they just don't go unprepared. So I think that's such good advice.
That makes me so happy. I obviously hate the circumstance. I want to be clear about
Yeah.
that. But that makes me so happy to hear because that's exactly why I've poured my heart and soul into these documents. And I'm dealing with a situation right now where somebody did not, they just used a contract they pulled off the internet, and
Yeah.
the mother of the bride, I'm going to just go ahead and say, is extorting the wedding professional, asking
Yeah.
for 3 times the amount that they paid, and the wedding hasn't even happened yet. I mean, just all sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So just to your point, you never know when your business is going to encounter what type of freak circumstance.
Yep. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best,
Mm-hmm.
as the
Yeah,
saying goes.
exactly. Exactly.
I love that. Well, tell us what you believe is the most important legal document while we're on the conversation of having a good contract the most important legal document contracts that every business needs to have? I'm sure there are several, but where would you
Mm-hmm.
say someone should start?
Okay, so assuming that listeners have a client-based business, I'm going to start there. I would start with, there's kind of a two-part answer to this. I'm trying really hard not to sound like a lawyer and say multiple answers to your question, Becky. But if I'm being, again, just brutally honest, start with your client contract, because that client contract acts as the seatbelt to every single interaction that your business has with obviously the clients crossing your doorstep. And especially if you're in the wedding industry, or, well, I'm going to say just in the creative industry in general. And I was talking to a photography client about this just yesterday. Photographers, for example, are some of the only types of wedding professionals who have something tangible that they can provide to the client after the event. The creative industry is built upon the concept of intangibles and intangible assets. And so defining the value of what you are creating and the protection, the intellectual property protection over what you are creating, and ensuring that you and the client are completely on the same page. There is what is considered by law a true legal meeting of the minds. That's going to obviously help you get paid, help avoid all of these nasty termination scenarios that we've kind of been hinting at. But that's what your reputation is built upon. And at the end of the day, we have to think from a legal perspective, but I would argue just as important as the legal perspective is thinking from a business perspective. And if you build that reputation of being professional, that's only going to serve you and enhance your career. So I would start with the client agreement. And my side note to that is, and you can stop me if I'm going on too much of a tangent.
This is great.
But anyone, if you have an LLC, please hear me well, you have to have an operating agreement. That's a contract that governs your business. That's a contract that proves, especially if you are listening and you're a sole member LLC or a single member LLC. Somebody like me, when I am in court trying to fulfill my ethical duties and I'm trying to recoup as much money as possible for my client, the first thing I'm doing is going after somebody's LLC to prove that they're not running the business properly. Because from my perspective, I need to get as much money for my client as possible. So I'm going to try to access your personal funds and your business funds. The operating agreement's that shield that protects somebody like me from being able to do that. So business side, operating agreement, well, like legal business operating agreement would be number one, but your client agreement, because you have to start bringing in money to even start building the businesses that we're talking about.
That's such good information on the operating agreement contract, because that's one thing that I tell all of my coaching clients is that's one of the first things you need to have in place. And I think a lot of times, especially when it's a solo gig and it's like, oh, well, I'm the only one, why I need to have that. And that's a really good explanation of what could happen if you find yourself in court one day that a lawyer is going to go after if you are running your business correctly. And that's huge. That's really a big deal.
Exactly. And one just like kind of final note to that I want to make is when I'm talking about these types of scary scenarios, it's not because I want to, my goal is for anybody listening to never have to encounter a lawyer in anything other than a friendly environment. And I'm not saying that we need to all operate in fear, but I want you to hear me well. I want you to hear the logic and just how a lawyer's brain works. And you now have the information as a business owner in terms of knowing what somebody's going to go after and why they're going to go after it. So now you have the information. You can just put one document in place and eliminate that scenario from your plate. So the law can be heady. It can be anxiety ridden. I'm fully aware of that. But it's also, the answers are a lot more simple usually at the end of the day than we make them out to be.
Yeah. And I think for me, being somebody who doesn't want to think about the anxiety side of running our businesses and what that could happen, and I just don't really want to think about it, I want to push it out, which I think is a lot of creative entrepreneurs. We just want to do the fun, pretty side of things. Once I have all those things in place and I have all my contracts and everything is set, it also is like kind of like peace inducing. It's like, oh, okay, I've done things the right way. I've set things up correctly. I have that good team behind me. And so then you feel like you really can do your job well, knowing you have the correct pieces in place. So that's good. I fully agree. Not to be fear inducing. Don't want to make anybody feel like, oh gosh, but just to say there is the other side of this. this could happen. Let's just be prepared so it's not scary.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's what I want. If I were to have a legal creative entrepreneur legacy, that's what I would want it to be, because building a business is very attainable, and doing so without having to, we're already working so hard to build these creative businesses. We don't need to burn ourselves out with anxiety that we can very easily take off our plate at the same time.
Amen. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, what is one mistake that you see new business owners make consistently in your area of expertise? Are you tired of wading through legal jargon, hoping your company contracts are legally sound? Say goodbye to the stress of what if and hello to Creative Law Shop contracts. We use Creative Law Shop's simple templates for our businesses. They are specifically tailored for creative entrepreneurs. Creative Law Shop provides the legal documents you need to succeed, from client contracts to operating agreements and everything in between. Creative Law Shop has what you are looking for. Don't let legal worries hold you back from turning your one-day dream into a right-now dream. Head over to shopcreativelaw.com. Enter code AURUM10 at checkout for 10% off. That's shopcreativelaw.com, code AURUM10 for 10% off.
Oh my gosh. Okay. You can't use, if something's free, it's free for a reason. I see business owners try to skimp on the law. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when they get caught or somebody savvy takes advantage of that. So for example, if you're a wedding photographer or a venue owner or something like that, your goal is to build the caliber, grow the caliber of the clients you're working with, right? So eventually you're going to, if you're not using documents that are professional, if you're not using documents that actually protect you, you're going to work with somebody that like has a family lawyer who looks it over and says, oh, well, you can get out of this contract for, this amount of money, or those types of things. So just trying to DIY the law, I think that's the obvious answer though. And again, if I could just like peel back the curtain a little bit more and be a little bit more blunt about it, waiting till the last minute. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see people make. Within my law firm, I know that the focus of this conversation is contracts. Within my law firm, I practice primarily intellectual property law, and I deal with in contract disputes, things like that. One of the biggest mistakes that we see all the time is people will wait to the last minute to actually take the appropriate action to protect themselves, expect results, or expect to be able to have the situation resolved immediately. A big part of why I created the Creative Law Shop is because each of those contracts took 12 to 15 billable hours to write. 12 to 15 billable hours is about 15 to 20 real life hours. So at best, it's like a really tough half week of work. It's usually a little bit more than that. And so if you reach out to an attorney, there's no magic wand behind the scenes. We're having to move mountains to make things happen. And I've had people reach out who have received a cease and desist, and they say, it's due tomorrow, and I'm just not sure how to respond. And that doesn't work. Yeah. So that kind of goes back to that original point. Establish those relationships early so that you have somebody to reach out to, so that you aren't put in a bind. And don't wait until the last minute to reach out. Don't wait until things go wrong to reach out, because it's very hard, very, very hard to provide immediate results.
That's so good. And to your point, when you're talking about you're eventually going to come up with a client who's going to ask questions or have a lawyer in their family. We had that happen a couple years ago at our venue. We had a bride whose dad was a contract lawyer, and he called and he had a bunch of questions about our contract. And it's always one of those things where you're like, oh, like you kind of get a stroke of anxiety when you have those phone calls. And I remember talking to him on the phone, and the first thing out of his mouth was, your contract's really good. And I was like, oh, wow, thank you. And he was, I actually just have like 2 questions about it, and I just wanted you to clarify. And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, I have like this boost of confidence that I've put things in the right order, that a contract lawyer, dad of the bride, is calling me with a couple questions, but starting it off saying, hey, your contract's really good. And the crazy thing about that story is they ended up canceling with us, and the dad did not even try at all to get his money back. And I was actually really afraid that he might, because something ended up happening. It's a long story, but they ended up moving venues. Yeah. Their guest count ended up being too big, and all these things transpired. And as soon as they had sent me that initial email, I was like, oh gosh, like I think he's going to call me, ask for his money back. And I never heard from him again. yeah, they just
Oh
sent
my
me an email
gosh.
saying, thank you so much for your time. And I was like, I feel really good that this dad contract lawyer didn't even try. Like, he was like, no, you have a good contract.
And so that's one of like the happiest stories I've heard, which is a weird compliment as it was coming out of my mouth.
Yes.
But I
Yes.
was like
Well,
nervous for that was
you can
going.
have that compliment because it was your contract that we've had tweaked just a little bit for Colorado law, and honestly, our
Yeah,
lawyer in Colorado too said, "Hey, this is a great contract," and didn't have to change hardly anything. So
that makes me so
your stuff
happy.
is solid. So we are very thankful for it, and we've had many instances like that one where it has come in handy knowing what our contracts say and
That,
all that. So
that makes me happy. That's one thing too, just again, not to get us on a tangent, Becky, but well, first of all, the venue contract's the one I've been in court over the most because during COVID,
yeah,
yeah, obviously, I don't need to explain to you how breach of
yep,
contract issues there
hmm
were, but photographers could usually find different ways to make up the package for the client, whether that
hmm
be elopements or whatever. Venue owners, I think, I'm going to just say something probably make a lot of people mad, but I think venue owners might have had it the worst out of everybody during COVID.
yeah, for sure.
At least, yeah, a little bit of a polarizing statement, maybe, but just literally based upon the amount of times I was in court and over what contract I was talking to the judges about in court, I'm gonna stand by that. And yeah, it's one of those things where you did exactly what I tell everybody to do in terms of having somebody in your jurisdiction be able to review it and make sure that it aligns with your jurisdiction because laws do shift, state by state. But
Yeah.
something that I've been talking to some of my clients about too, and this is just more of an observation than anything, I think that post 2020, clients are a little bit more, I don't know if savvy is the right word, but they're more aware that dates could change or that unexpected events could arise. Like I got married in 2015 and my wedding was 3 days after I passed the bar exam, which is like the apex of stress, but
Yeah, that's incredible.
wouldn't recommend that one, that timing. So technically I was a lawyer when I got married, but I never thought about like the fact that the date of the wedding could change or anything like that. I think clients are coming into contractual relationships now much more aware of that just because of what we all went through in 2020, 2021.
I would agree with that. We see a lot more questions come up in tours and in the booking process of couples and parents a lot of times being very
Yes.
uneasy, very unsure. Just, I think too, because all we saw in the news about weddings was the horror stories, not the
Uh-huh.
ones where the wedding venue fixed it for the couple. We only saw the horror stories. And so I think couples are definitely uneasy. And so we've
Yep.
gone about having really good ways of explaining how we take care of that. Okay, this is not something that we had chatted about talking about before, but I feel like this is something that I did not know for a long time in the
Yeah.
industry, and that is the percentage that we take at the beginning of a contract. And this might be a long answer, but I would love for you to just touch on it because I feel like I tell so many of my coaching clients that you cannot take 50% upfront. Can you tell us why?
I am so glad that you asked me this question. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I kind of caused waves talking about this a few years ago, but one of the biggest mistakes, kind of going back to your question earlier, one of the biggest mistakes people make in their contracts is asking for 50% upfront. So I'm going to break this down from a legal perspective and a business perspective. Starting with the legal perspective, first of all, anytime that and you can look at any of our blog posts on the shop website, we talk about this. I always refer to that first payment as an initial payment simply because some judges in some states view the word deposit and retainer differently, like as having different legal mechanisms under the law. And that sounds like splitting hairs and that sounds ridiculous, but that's literally a lawyer's job to do. And so the easiest way
Yeah.
to bypass that part of the conversation or that part of the debate is just simply to call it the initial payment because that's what it is. So we're going to start with that being point number one. Point number two is that no matter what your contract says, no matter what type of ironclad contract you have, at the end of the day, if that dispute does go to court in the United States of America, anyone has the right to sue anybody over anything. That doesn't mean that the lawsuit's going to work out in that person's favor. It'll probably get dismissed immediately, but it means that there is always a chance, no matter how protected you are, that you could be in court. And I can tell you, as somebody who has sat down and looked in the eyes of judges, when I'm trying to defend clients who have taken, especially we're obviously talking about the wedding industry or the creative industry, when I'm trying to explain why taking 50% of a payment up front was equitable to a judge, especially when we're talking about something, wedding days are the easiest example because obviously the wedding day has not occurred until, you know, until the date of the of the wedding.
Right.
And when a judge is sitting there asking my client, literally like cross-examining my client and saying, tell me why you were owed 50% of the payment up front. Be specific, line item it. Tell me exactly why you were owed that. That's a freaking hard question to answer. I have not seen a single case in all of the case law that I've researched and then all of just my personal experiences. I have not seen a single time where 50% has been upheld. And clients, smart clients, know that as well. This is not hidden. This is just a popular, it's like folklore within the creative industry that it's doable. In the real world, it's not. So that's the legal side of things. From the business side of things, this is where we have to, I want everybody listening to get used to kind of thinking with a strategist brain as much as possible. If you're in a position where the client is terminating, and it's never clean, it's never like they're terminating exactly on the date that you said that they could terminate on. You know, the math is easy and all of that. When you are trying to negotiate those termination, like what gets refunded or what payments are still held to, etc. If you have broken your payments up into two payments of 50%, I can just tell you point blank, if you came to me and asked me to argue on your behalf, I would not take that case. You've cornered yourself, you've boxed yourself into a position where you're playing checkers instead of playing chess. If you've broken your payment schedule up into a series of, usually it's 4 payments of 25%, 33%, whatever you want to do, at least you have 4 different things. That's why I say it's chess versus checkers. Yeah. At least we have 4 different payments that we are now negotiating with rather than just being boxed out of a full refund. The final note of that is according to US law, a contract is a meeting of the minds. So a judge is always going to look at a contract from a public policy perspective. And this was a big lesson that even I learned during COVID. I think COVID was I don't know if judges would say the same thing right now, but during COVID, judges would look at contracts and they would say, yeah, but we're looking at a couple who is getting married. It was their first wedding. They never entered into a wedding contract before. This is your job. It's, to the venue owner client that I'm thinking of in this specific case. She literally said to him, I know that your venue is one of the biggest in town. I know that you have weddings almost every week. You probably send out hundreds of contracts. This is where you should have done a little bit better to educate your client on what could and couldn't be done. So when defining what can and can't be done when it comes to payment schedules, what I really want anybody listening to this to do, if you don't have a contract from the Creative Law Shop, I want you to go in. Well, I want you to find our blog post because I'm pretty sure I just gave the language out for free because this was such a big issue in the last 5 years. But I want you to make sure that you have the words non-refundable and non-transferable. That second word is huge when it comes to the initial payment. And then I want you to make sure that you have a line in the contract in that initial payment section that spells it out as plain as day, that the parties agree that even though you're working together to, execute an event or whatever the services of the contract are, the client agrees and understands that this initial payment is required to reserve the space on your calendar, because even if the client were to cancel the event, even if technically, and again, venue owners are my easiest targets here. So even if technically the venue hasn't quote unquote done anything to actually host the event at the time of cancellation, that client who's canceling on you has still precluded you from being able to book another event on that date that could have been for a package twice as expensive as theirs. So you're putting out, there's a risk and reward for both parties. And that's what judges look for when they look for what's equitable. And when I say public policy, that's the kind of stuff that they're looking for to make your payment schedule make sense.
That totally makes sense. And yeah, and it's good too. And I think I read this on one of your blog posts too, is keeping in mind that our contracts aren't just to protect us as the vendor or the venue or the photographer. It's to protect both parties. And so remembering that when we're putting that's what a judge is going to look at, is is this protecting everyone? This isn't just for your sake. So I think it's easy to think like,
Yeah.
oh, my contract protects me. So that's really
That
good information. Thank you for
exactly.
going into detail on that.
Yeah, you can tell I've engaged in that debate once or twice.
Yes, I will link all of those blog posts to that specific topic because it is honestly the biggest thing I see when I start coaching someone is that they have that 50% retainer or deposit and they're using the wrong language and it's way too much money. And yeah, so I think that's so important. And I
Yeah.
love that topic so much.
And just again, think of it from a termination perspective. I just want to add that one more time. Think
Yeah.
about literally think through how you're going to negotiate if you've only put two checkers on the board. It's going to be
I
hard.
love that example of playing chess and checkers. I have a 5-year-old and we're trying to teach him how to play checkers right now. And he really wants to play chess so badly and he doesn't know how. And it was a really good picture to me of it's elementary to play checkers and
Yeah,
it's much more elevated and takes much more knowledge and strategy to play chess. So it's such a
exactly.
good example
Yeah.
of how we should be running our businesses. So,
Yep.
well, tell us how we can be more confident as business owners when it comes to our contracts and how we are presenting them to clients.
Yeah, I love this question. I'm glad that you asked this because actually I think just based on some of your own stories that you've shared in this conversation, you set the best example for anybody listening. Because the advice that I always give to my clients is understand that contract inside and out, which I mean that's annoying advice because the response is usually, but I'm not a contract lawyer.
Yeah.
But and this kind of actually goes back to I'm not going to keep harping on the initial payment topic, but this goes back to what we were just talking about. Know what you're charging and why you're charging it. Know what your termination schedule is and why you've set it. And literally what would happen if somebody terminated on, X date. Exactly. Like do the math and spell it out and know exactly what would be owed. Getting yourself so you don't have to learn, you don't have to like sit there and get out a legal dictionary and learn the word indemnification and all of those types of things that you'll see in a contract, but know what you're asking of the client and why and how you would back up what you're asking of the client. That's a bit of a broad broad stroked answer, but this is where, just to get kind of a little bit corny about it, the word professional comes from the Latin word professus, and that just means to speak forth. So literally the first time that you are asking your client, the first time that you are actually operating with your client as a professional, no matter what your conversations have been with the client ahead of time, it's that moment where you are asking them when you're sliding the contract across the table, or in our day and age, sending that email with the contract and asking them to sign that and trust you and enter into that professional relationship with you. Be prepared for questions. Be prepared to explain it. And again, I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to know why you're asking what you're asking of the client. This is something in the next couple months everybody will see, but this is something that I'm working on with the Creative Law Shop to provide even more resources on, so that you have like a lexicon that you can come back to and reference so that you can be as confident as possible. But just know that you are a professional. I get intimidated all the time sending people contracts, but I also know I've done the back end numbers and I know that what I'm asking for is just and it's right. And I know that I can change the course of my clients, the trajectory of their business by providing them that service. Same thing for any creative entrepreneur or wedding professional. You can make an incredible day happen for them, and they just have to trust you through that process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. And I love something you said before we started recording. You said lots of questions in the legal realm are easy to answer because they're just the truth. And I think that's really important to remember when we're presenting things to our clients, that if we have a good contract and we know it well and we're able to present it in a professional way, it's the truth. It's what's going to hold up justice for both parties. And that should bring both sides peace about the situation. And I'll say that all the time when I have somebody who asks a lot of questions. I say, I encourage you to take this contract home, read over it. It is to protect both you and us. This is not a one-sided agreement. Agreement is between both of us. So I want you to know that this is in place to protect both of us. And that usually gives them a lot of peace to know that I obviously have their best interest in mind too. I want to make their day beautiful and the day that they dreamed of.
Yeah, exactly. And
Awesome.
again, just kind of like what you said, I know the law can be vulnerable and emotional and nerve-wracking, and it's usually not anybody's fun side of business, but
Right.
it is so much more simplistic than we build it up in our mind. And we're
Totally.
used to having, it's so hard to be a creative entrepreneur and it's
Yeah.
so easy to add things to our stress list, but the information's out there and it's just a matter of taking it and utilizing it in your own business.
Yeah, for sure. And you guys have done a really good job of creating resources, not just the templates, but your blog posts and things that you're posting on Instagram. So many things that have been so incredibly helpful to our team to be like, oh, this is coming down the pipes, or we need to get ready for this. And you guys just do a good job of equipping
Thank you.
creatives with, I feel like, the knowledge in a easy to read. It's not the legalese that we all think of when we think of legal documents. We think, I'm not gonna be able to understand that. You guys have done a good job. So anybody
Thank you.
listening, if you feel overwhelmed with it, you need to go check out Creative Law Shop because it truly has been such a great tool.
I really appreciate that. The hardest part of writing any of those contracts was taking out the legalese. So,
Yes, I'm
so I will
sure.
take that compliment because I worked hard for that one.
Are you drowning in client tasks? From contracts to communication, keeping up can be overwhelming. But fear not. I'm here to introduce you to HoneyBook, the ultimate solution for managing your business seamlessly. Say goodbye to stress and hello to streamlined workflows. With HoneyBook CRM, handling contracts, payments, and client services has never been easier. Join me and countless others who've discovered the power of efficiency. Ready to take the leap? Head to share.honeybook.com/Aurum and use code Aurum for an incredible 50% off for an entire year. That's right, half off for 12 whole months. Trust me, this is a game changer you won't regret. Visit share.honeybook.com/Aurum and enter the code Aurum, that's AURUM, for your exclusive Aurum offer. Is there anything that we didn't get to touch on or that you think is really important? Any last thoughts that you think our listeners need to hear from you?
Yeah, I'm gonna end with a boring note, so apologies in
That's okay.
advance. But one thing that any business owner that's listening, if you have a website, you do need to know that it is a legal requirement, a federally mandated legal requirement that you have a privacy policy on your website. And you need to have, although it's not a law, you need to have a terms and conditions on your website as well. It was such a fun way to start the year, Becky. 8 states came out with new privacy laws.
Oh, that's
Like
fun.
literally the first week of January. It's like right when I finished all of my annual planning, I was ready to hit the ground running. And then literally 8 states came out with laws. And I spent the next 2 weeks reading through laws and updating our privacy policies. So just know that this is something that's becoming more and more of a hot button issue, literally around the world. And governing bodies like the FTC are cracking down more and more on people, on businesses that do not have the proper documentation on their website. So yeah, that's just, again, not the most exciting note to end
Yeah.
on, but one thing that everybody you do need to know about that.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I know we have all of our contracts through you guys. We've bought all of our templates. And anytime that there's a change like that, you guys always send out updates to those contracts. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yeah. So I offer updates to my contracts. And when it comes to an integrity perspective, it's honestly, it's the privacy policy and it's pandemic that made me do this, but I couldn't sell the same privacy policy that was legal in 2018 in 2019. And I couldn't, as a business owner, find a way to justify that. I could not find the integrity behind that. So anytime a new law comes out, privacy policies are they're very difficult when it comes to the law, but they're the easiest because we're all bound by the same laws. Anytime a new law comes out, those documents are updated. So this is not a scenario where obviously people can just email and request different wording in a provision. But
Right.
if I'm in a scenario just from an integrity perspective where I'm in court and I know that something needed to be added in. So for example, during the pandemic, judges started requiring, at least every judge I was in front of, kicked out every single termination, breach of contract case unless the parties had signed a termination agreement. Every single one. And so I went in and added that language to every single one of our termination provisions across the board in every client agreement. just because I knew that that was the most legally sound way for people to utilize those contracts within their business. So anytime that I experience something boots on the ground that I know that could be up level in a contract, we go ahead and we make that edit. And yeah, we stay up to date on all of the, again, super thrilling
Yes.
privacy laws and all of those things, and text message laws that came out this year, and just all sorts of stuff.
That right there of like your guys' integrity to keeping things updated, it is, I tell everyone I meet with, they're worth every penny because you have peace of mind that they're going to be legally sound. And when something changes, Paige's team is going to let you know if it's something that needs to be changed in your contract. So that is something that just sets you guys apart too. And I really appreciate that on our end, that I don't have to go and see like, oh, there's new laws about my website and texting. And you guys will, if I have those contracts, you guys will update me if I need to know, which is really...
I appreciate you saying that, because it wasn't a hard business decision, but it was one of those, like, there have been a lot of late nights when, like, gosh darn it, this is, it's not pleasant, but it's just, frankly, it's just simply the right thing to do. And that's where the conversation ends for me.
And I think that goes back to surrounding yourself with people who do their job well and having a team of people. And I mean, I would say from my perspective, you guys and your team are on my team. I feel like you guys are the tools that are in my back pocket. And so surrounding yourself with people who do their job with integrity is going to push you to do your job with integrity, and will hopefully put you in a place that, again, if something ever were to happen, you've done your job well and you've put all of the right pieces in place to protect everyone. So I appreciate that about you guys.
Thank you. That is exactly my goal. So thank you very much for saying that.
Yes. Of course. Well, can you tell us where everyone can follow you, buy contracts, learn more, get resources?
Yeah, so you can go to, I mentioned at the beginning, I have a couple different businesses. Everything contract related you can find at the Creative Law Shop, which is shopcreativelaw.com. One quick note that I'll make, that if you don't mind, Becky, that I didn't add in earlier, is when it comes to every template that you see in the shop, I don't just write templates. Everything is written for myself or a client, and I redact the names, and then those are the contracts you see in the shop. So they're not arbitrary and capricious. That was something that was really, really important to me.
I love that.
So all of the contracts are at shopcreativelaw.com. And then what I actually do day in and day out, and the focus of my law firm, is I work as an outside general counsel for small businesses. I primarily focus that work on intellectual property law, which is a whole other conversation that I would love to have. But we trademark, copyright, registration, and building those intangible assets for that creative entrepreneur so that they have a business that is protected and sellable at the end of the day. So, and that's at Paige Hulse Law.
Well, we will link all of that for our listeners to find you. And then we also have a discount code for all of your templates at Shop Creative Law, and that is Aurum10. I'll link all of that in the show notes so that people can find your amazing things. And I love that you added they're not just templates that you threw together. They were actually used for clients. That's just shows your credibility and just who you are as a person in a business. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much again for your time today and for sharing your really valuable information. I know this is an episode that I learned some things, and I know I look at your stuff all the time. So you are a wealth of knowledge. So thank you again for your time. It was so fun.
I really appreciate that, Becky. Thank you for this. This was a really great conversation.
I think you just became a better version of you. You finished another episode of the Aurum Collective podcast, and it shows. If you want more, head over to aurumcollective.com for show notes and discount codes from today's episode. If you want to keep the conversation rolling, join our community on Instagram and Facebook. All the details are at aurumcollective.com. Until next time, keep making your one-day dream a right now dream.